Hello and welcome to another episode of Reboot America. I'm Chincy Crochet and I'm here with my good friend David Smith. How are you, David?
I just see now the character Groot. I am Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy jamming out to that music in front of Drax the Destroyer. Drax keeps looking over at him like, "Stop that!" And Groot's only dancing when Drax isn't looking at him. That's cool music. That's cool groove.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I know, like 90% of people who ever listen to this will know exactly what I'm saying. They'll be, "Oh, that's funny. I can see that." And then 10 will be like, "Yeah, I'm with Chincy. I don't know what that is."
Anyway, let's get into the subject of this podcast. I want to revisit something we touched upon during our first episode, which I'm still editing. One of these days I'll get it done, but we are on record. During the episode, I stated that I believe between 20 and 30% of the Republican voters will only consider voting for Trump. They will not consider voting for anyone else as the Republican nominee. A new poll from CBS News, YouGov, it was conducted between April 27, 29, just when we were doing our recording. It's about the 2024 Republican nomination. As of now, who are you considering supporting in the Republican primary? And these are supposedly likely GOP primary voters. 24% said they're only considering Trump. 49% they're considering Trump and other candidates. And 27% are not considering Trump at all. So this lines up with my suspicion and my observation that Trump has a solid 25% or so. It also supports my argument that DeSantis should skip 2024 because it's going to be very, very difficult for him to win if 25% of the Republican voters simply say, if it's not Trump, I'm not voting. Now, you had a very strong opinion about that attitude. Do you care to share it?
Sure. My entire time as a Republican activist, from the time that I made the decision that I'm a Republican because the Democratic Party is just simply on a different page, in a different book, in a different language, in a different library, somewhere on another continent, their vision of what this country needs to be going forward is so different than mine that I'm a Republican. Take it for what it is, and the Republican Party is my mechanism for achieving some measure of what I think the country needs to be going forward. So here I am. About 2002, when I became active in Republican politics, I became active in policy analysis sometime thereafter, ran for Congress myself. That went swimmingly. I've always operated under the assumption that in the primary, you can support any candidate you want, but whoever wins the nomination, whether it be for president or dog catcher, we all come together after that for the general election. And this idea that I will not support anybody other than my guy in November. If my guy does not win the nomination, then in November, I'm going to, go pound sand. I have absolutely no patience for that attitude. If it's a candidate who's saying some of the things that we're seeing from Trump now, the tweet that he sent out on his Truth social media platform that was saying, if Ron DeSantis jumps into this, he could be ruining his career and not going to win in November. There's no place for that, for a candidate to be saying stuff like that. In a political party, we are a team. In the Republican Party, we have a very vast array of ideology, what they believe, political operations, who their supporters are, how their supporters act. We have to be able to come together in November. And for supporters of Trump and anti-Trump alike to be saying things like, if we don't get our way, we're going to take our toys and go home. In team sports, you can't play like that. You can't play like Dennis Rodman when he just took his shoes off and sat down on the sideline. That's not how team sports sports work. And GOP politics in this country is most definitely a team sport. And we have to be able to get over. I mean, I've been a participant in some rather bloody battles, metaphorically speaking. The 2002 campaign that was the first one that I was involved with in Denton County was to replace Dick Armey. And his son, who was Denton County judge at the time and in 2002, was kind of the anointed next congressman. And most in Denton County said, nah, I don't think so. And I was one of those. And I supported Keith Self. He was the third place guy in the primary with those two, and I think there may have been a couple of others. And it came down to Michael Burgess in second place, Scott Armey in first place. And everybody who did not vote for Scott Armey in the primary pretty much came in behind Dr. Burgess. The race in Denton County, it was a bloodbath. Eventually it became 55-45 Burgess over Armey. And Armey was sent packing, didn't go to Congress. And Burgess has been there for 20 years and counting. We have battles like that, but it illustrates you can have some real battles having been through that battle. And there are some nerves and there are some feelings that never recovered from that after that, I'm sure. But the thing about it is we come together after the primary and we support whoever it is that we duke it out and we decide this is going to be our nominee in November. This is who we're supporting now. You had some very, very interesting analysis and the implications that has that we have to consider from right now.
Well, this just illustrates that the Republican Party finds itself in a very difficult situation. When you're facing the prospect of a quarter of your voters not supporting your nominee, it makes it nearly impossible to win in the general. I mean, I fully appreciate what you're saying about the party having to come together, and especially after a rough and tough primary. But I seriously doubt that in the example you provided, in the case you mentioned, there were the kind of deep feelings that Trump supporters have for their man. It's a very unusual situation we're in. How do you win a general? And how do you solve this problem? How do you get the Trump voters to support someone else?
I mean, do you go to Donald Trump and you say, listen, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll fundraise for you and we'll give you $1 billion if you just walk away?
Well, that's an answer.
I don't think that he would take that, but if he would, is it worth it? I don't know. That's a tough question. I mean, number one, it's a tough thing to propose. I'm not even sure if it's legal.
No, I seriously doubt that would be legal. There's another problem that the Republican Party faces. What if Donald Trump does get the nomination? How do you get never-Trumpers to vote for him? I mean, ideally, Trump would have simply stepped aside gracefully. He had his 2 runs and support the nominee, be the elder statesman. Of course, that would never happen because that's just not in Trump's nature. I did see another solution or possible solution. It was floating around Twitter. It was a poll showing that a DeSantis-Trump ticket or Trump-DeSantis ticket would be a winning combination. And that would be a way to solve this problem. Do you think the never-Trumpers would vote for a Trump-DeSantis ticket?
That's a tough call. I don't know if that changes the algebra of this poll, the CBS YouGov poll, because that's like adding NutraSweet to Dr. Pepper. It's already sweet. Now you're adding something completely different, and it's just going to taste awful. I mean, it's like my scenario of, do you offer the guy $1 billion and ask him just to walk away? I think that they both have problematic aspects. I don't know that the never-Trumpers will accept Trump under any circumstances. I don't know that there's any hope of, well, if you have DeSantis there, maybe that's a moderating force to counteract Trump behind closed doors or whatever. You didn't see that with Mike Pence. There was nobody in the first administration. Donald Trump is going to do what Donald Trump is going to do, and that's all there is to it.
Yes.
I don't know that it makes a nice article for a journalist who has to get something in by deadline. But I think that's just about all that amounts to. Number one, I don't know that either one of those two guys, DeSantis could play the game for 4 years, just like Mike Pence played the game for 4 years as the number two. Behind closed doors, probably had some Donald moments with the president, but it's not going to change how Donald Trump is going to behave or govern or campaign or anything else. He's going to be Trump. DeSantis could gain a lot of, for lack of a better term, experience. Nobody's going to be able to now say, well, he doesn't have the experience in foreign policy, for example. He's going to be able to, as the vice president, have his fingers all over foreign policy.
DeSantis is a professional politician, so he understands when it's time to make a compromise. I can see him being able to analyze such a ticket and say exactly what you said. This will put me as a vice president. This will give me the foreign policy experience that I currently do not have. It also would win over the Trump supporters. I do agree with you about the never Trumpers not supporting such a ticket. They just don't want Trump.
Right.
Adding a little sweetener, as you said, it doesn't address their fundamental problem, which is they absolutely despise Trump. And I was telling you earlier about a friend of mine. He had voted Republican his entire life, but he voted for Biden because he absolutely despises Donald Trump. In 2016, he did not vote because he could not bring himself to support Hillary Clinton. But in 2020, Biden was acceptable enough. And oddly, despite everything that has happened under Biden, he doesn't regret his vote at all. Because I thought for sure after the many disasters, just the little word salads that keep coming out of Kamala Harris, right? I thought for sure he'd be embarrassed about his vote. Not at all. As far as he's concerned, Donald Trump is a really bad man.
Right.
And if it is Trump and Biden, he will vote for Biden and Kamala again. So that's the mentality of that, not considering Trump.
In our earlier conversation, kind of going through this, I kind of talked myself through a scenario where I think I may have figured out where those 81 million votes came from that we've all looked at and just said, what the heck was that? What number is that? That number is what has driven all of the suspicion, opposition, January 6th stuff, the post-2020 election questioning of the results, accusations of voter fraud, etc. All of that stuff came about because that 81 million vote count was just so eye-poppingly unbelievable. And as it turns out, this poll from CBS, I think, shows us, and using your anecdotal example of your friend who's an ever-Trumper and does not regret voting for Joe Biden, when you've got 27% of likely Republican voters who say they will not consider Donald Trump in 2024, I seriously think that that's a very significant number of otherwise Republican voters who in 2020 flipped at least on that one race and voted for Joe Biden. And it doesn't take very long for you to think that, you could come up with, if you're going to have a 50-50 race, if you have in that scenario 3 million flipping from Republican to Democrat, all of a sudden, instead of a 50-50, 78 million to 78 million, you've got 81 million to 74, almost 75 million. That's a very realistic scenario that just happened. And this poll explains it, and your friend illustrates it.
It also explained the 2022 election results. Let's take a state like Pennsylvania, right? Where I think people are still scratching their head, wondering how did Fetterman manage to win. Again, I think that this played a role because Dr. Oz was Donald Trump's pick. He was closely identified with Trump, holding rallies with Trump. And when the general election came around, here is a candidate that clearly had health issues, to put it mildly. And yet the people supported that. That's that 27%. And that's the real danger. I mean, again, I go back to my previous point. The only way for the GOP to get out of this box would be for Donald Trump to step aside gracefully.
Good luck with that.
I'm beginning to think that perhaps the best way to defeat Biden, who I want to see him defeated, because I think he's extremely destructive, is doing a lot of damage. It may be going in the Democrat primary and voting for Robert Kennedy Jr. That may be the best bet as far as defeating Biden. Because when it comes to the general election, if this poll is anywhere close to reality, anywhere close, and I think there's a good reason to think that it is, I just don't see how the Republican Party wins, especially now when you have states like Arizona, like Georgia, which were always considered red states, and the Democrats didn't even bother to campaign there. Now they're contested states. So the electoral count, the electoral vote is even more difficult now that these red states are being contested. So you have that, and then you have that 27% that if they see Trump anywhere near the ticket, they're just going to go for the Democrats.
Yeah, that's a major concern. I mean, with the number of local and single member district people, that's a major concern. We talked about that at length in 2016, how if the GOP had one united front, how that might, with Donald Trump, that might be a benefit to them down ballot. And there were troubles in that era. The GOP, you had such a strong presence even then of the never Trumpers, and vocally saying, "I will never vote for this man." This could really be a major problem. And all of the same issues that we're bringing up, I see as being an issue on down ballot, because if you have down ballot candidates who say, "I'm for Trump, I'm for Trump," I think that you're going to see some of those 24% or 27% never Trumpers say, "I'm not for you then." And when you're talking about races that you may have only 5 or 10% difference, that can swing things. Whether that person goes and votes for the Democratic candidate in the race or whether they just don't vote, that can swing races. And that can have impacts in places that otherwise we could have some very positive impacts.
The only good thing about this 27% is they might not vote for Trump at the presidential level, but I think in 2020, if we take a look at the results, they are willing to support the Republicans down ballot. Now, the 24% would only vote for Trump. They'll probably sit the election out. And if they do that, that's going to be a disaster down ballot. I want to end this episode by asking you one final question. Is there anything that the GOP could have done to avoid the situation?
I don't know what that would be. I don't know what that would be. That's a good question. That's a really great question. That may be the proverbial $64,000 question, so to speak. That's a great question. I don't know the answer to it.
The trend has been there. So this is not exactly surprising that we find ourselves in this situation. And I honestly don't believe that the party has any idea how to address it.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of obvious at this point.
I think we've discussed this enough, so let's get our out music here. And I guess we'll talk to each other soon. You have a good evening.
Yeah, great topic. Great topic. Good conversation.
Bye-bye.